Good morning. Thank you for watching. I'm Shakil 5858. I am Amir. I am thankful to all international news resources and my team. Following are the news which have been reported by American, European, Canadian, Australian, African, and Asian channels, and AFP, AP, and Reuters news agencies. Now the headlines. Classified information and new conclusion in Canada. Manitoba MP grilled. Heavy rain caused flood in South Florida. Reproductive rights, a ruling by Supreme Court in US. Ukraine support for G7 summit in Rome. Guns and teachers in US. American journalist trial in Russia. Phoenix Police Department and civil rights violation. FAA chairman testimony. Microsoft president grilled. Whaling hunting permission for Indians. American Indians. Supreme Court Justice Terrence and Trips. FDIC new chairman. On Wall Street, Dow Jones Industry down, Nasdaq and S&P 500 increased. Now the news in detail.
On this Thursday night, new conclusions about classified information. The NDP leader says he's alarmed after reading the explosive report about some MPs allegedly colluding with foreign states.
They are indeed traitors to the country.
A Manitoba MP grilled.
Who did you meet with?
The reports Nikki Ashton billed taxpayers for trips that included her family. South Florida submerged, the damage from the downpours. Plus navigating new waters and new lives. The two pals who sailed off Ukraine's coast and started over in Calgary.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Farah Nasser.
Good evening to you, and thank you for joining us. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says he's disturbed and worried after seeing an unredacted report from the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, or NSICOP. A veil of doubt has been hanging over Parliament after the report suggested some parliamentarians wittingly colluded with foreign state actors. Now, earlier this week, Green Party leader Elizabeth May had a different take. She saw the same report and said Canadians can be assured no current MPs have shown disloyalty to Canada, and the initial reaction was overblown. But Singh today gave a much bleaker assessment of what he's read. Our chief political correspondent David Aiken has our top story tonight.
I am more alarmed today than I was yesterday.
At first, that decision. Farah.
David Aiken in Ottawa. Thank you, David.
I declare the motion carried.
And today, MPs of all stripes voted to pass Bill C-70 in a bid to improve Canada's safeguards against foreign meddling. The Countering Foreign Interference Act legislation aims to modernize existing laws against such threats. This includes introducing new criminal offences around sabotage and expanding CSIS warrant powers. It will also establish a foreign influence transparency registry, requiring certain individuals to publicly register activities that may be related to foreign influence. The bill will now be sent to the Senate. An NDP MP is taking heat for billing taxpayers more than $17,000 in travel costs over the Christmas period in 2022. Nikki Ashton justifies the expenses, claiming she was attending meetings with stakeholders. House of Commons travel records indicate Ashton and her family flew from her home in the province of Manitoba to Ottawa on December 21st, days after the House had adjourned for the break. On Christmas Day, the family of four traveled to Quebec City and then later to Montreal. She billed the House of Commons for some expenses incurred. Today, Ashton, who is the NDP's official languages critic, was repeatedly asked who she met with, but she would not provide specifics.
I met with various people, and I just want to be clear that the rules of the House of Commons are very clear.
And be for the purpose of the fulfillment of the members' parliamentary functions. Ashton's also faced criticism for not being in Ottawa enough. MPs can participate virtually under pandemic-era rules that were made permanent last year. Quebec provincial police say they've made several arrests in connection to a massive data breach and multi-million-dollar fraud at Desjardins Financial Group.
Ce matin, nos enquêteurs ont procédé.
Police say 4 arrests took place this morning, including the detention of Sébastien Boulanger-Dorval, a former Desjardins employee who is said to be the mastermind behind the data theft and fraud case. The crimes are alleged to have taken place between 2016 and 2019 and are thought to be one of the largest ever breaches among Canadian financial institutions. Roughly 9.7 million people and businesses were reportedly affected. Police have issued arrest warrants for 4 others. Ukraine dominated the agenda today at the G7 in Italy. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and other leaders reinforced their solidarity with the war-torn country through a loan package worth tens of billions of dollars. U.S. President Joe Biden also signed a 10-year security pact with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Mackenzie Gray's traveling with the Prime Minister and reports on the strong showing of support for Ukraine.
Thank you, Justin.
For the second time in a month,
Obviously, this is a really important time to have you here at the G7.
the Prime Minister meeting with one of his closest political partners.
You've been the first.
That's seeping into Western capitals.
Mackenzie joins us now from Bari, Italy. So, Mac, while there's agreement on Ukraine, there is division behind the scenes on a key social issue at the G7. What's the sticking point here?
Yeah, Farah, Italian and other international media are reporting Italy is taking out language around safe and legal abortions from the G7 communique, which is the official closing statement from the summit. Now, abortion access is traditionally an issue Canada pushes hard on internationally, but the Canadian Sherpa, the chief negotiator at the summit, wouldn't directly address the matter when pushed by reporters.
You'll see in the communique tomorrow that there is very strong language on gender equality, on LGBTQ issues. So I think this is an area where G7 countries are absolutely committed, and the communique tomorrow is going to bear that out.
So no clear response in the Canadian position, but it wouldn't be the first time Trudeau and the far-right Italian Prime Minister have clashed, Farah, with the two publicly sparring over LGBTQ rights at the G7 last year.
Mackenzie Gray in Bari, Italy. Thank you, Mac. In the U.S., there's a major victory for abortion rights. The Supreme Court there unanimously ruled to preserve access to mifepristone, one of two drugs typically used in medication abortions. All 9 justices quashed a legal challenge by a group of anti-abortion doctors seeking to roll back the pill's federal approval. The decision says, despite the plaintiffs' moral, ideological objections to elective abortion, they lacked any legal basis to sue over the drug's availability. Abortion rights are set to be a hot issue in this year's presidential election, 2 years after the court ruled to overturn Roe versus Wade. Russian prosecutors say U.S. journalist Evan Gershkovich will face trial on espionage charges. The Wall Street Journal reporter was arrested in March of 2023. The 32-year-old is the first American journalist arrested on spy charges in Russia since the Cold War. Mike Armstrong reports on the accusations, widely condemned by the West.
For the first time since he was arrested, Russian authorities are at least outlining the allegations against Evan Gershkovich, though they're still not giving any proof. In a statement, prosecutors say the American journalist is charged with espionage. They say he was working, quote, on instructions from the CIA and collected secret information about a company involved in the production and repair of military equipment.
Totally false, very unfair to him.
Paul Beckett is with the Wall Street Journal and calls the accusation Gershkovich was a spy utterly bogus, but also a reminder of where he is. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
Riot police in Argentina's capital used tear gas, rubber bullets, and water cannons to disperse thousands of protesters outside Congress late last night as lawmakers inside voted to narrowly approve controversial economic reforms. Libertarian President Javier Milei has called his landmark austerity package key to getting the country's embattled economy back on track. But critics call the measures an overreach, which give the president broad legislative powers until the end of his term in 2027. More than 1,000 officers were deployed in response to the protests. At least 20 arrests were made, and dozens of protesters and police officers were injured. There's a massive fire raging in an oil refinery in the city of Erbil in northern Iraq. It started Wednesday night in the refinery's liquid asphalt warehouse. Local media reports say firefighters have the blaze under control. A number of people are said to be injured. No deaths have been reported. Severe weather is set to strike parts of Ontario and Quebec. What people there can expect coming up. Plus, flash floods in Florida. The torrential rain that soaked the Sunshine State. 2 workers in Calgary were injured last night while working to repair that water main break. Officials say a contractor was welding a new piece of pipe when a chain broke and struck him and another employee. The mayor says both were taken to hospital and neither is in critical condition. Residents are still being urged to scale back their water usage. Restrictions are expected to remain in place until at least the middle of next week. Some nasty spring weather is looming over parts of Quebec and Ontario, including a high risk of a tornado in the Greater Toronto area. Environment Canada says severe thunderstorms are expected throughout the evening, along with powerful winds and temperatures soaring into the mid-30s. It's all part of that same weather system that triggered reports of tornadoes in Manitoba yesterday. Over the course of 3 hours, the storm tracked about 300 kilometers. Damage was reported in several areas, including properties west of Winnipeg. And in the U.S., a flash flooding emergency has entered its 3rd day across southern Florida, and there is no end in sight. More than 600 millimeters of rain has fallen so far, and there are more torrential downpours to come. Jackson Prosco reports.
The rain has been relentless, soaking South Florida in a multi-day deluge.
There's been storms, there's been rain, heavy rain, but never like this. This is extreme.
In Fort Lauderdale, so much rain fell so quickly, cars were stranded in high water as roads turned to rivers. Fish were spotted in the streets.
The waters are up this way, up to here.
Rain for this historic mess, knowing more days of heavy rain are forecast through the weekend. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Going green ahead, how electric boats could be the future of fishing. Just as the auto industry has been shifting towards electric vehicles, Canada's fishing industry is making similar moves. Proponents of electric fishing vessels say they're getting closer to having electric boats in the water, and governments are floating millions in funding to help. Heidi Petrachek reports.
Lobster boats have been this way for decades, run on diesel fuel. But the push for a greener, cleaner fishing industry has led to this.
In the very bottom of the enclosure, here's the batteries, the lithium-ion batteries.
It's a diesel-electric hybrid. Locals like Barry Eddy are curious but unconvinced.
Salt water and electricity don't mix. I don't care where you are, who you are.
There's still plenty of work to do to win over folks like Eddy. Then there's all the necessary infrastructure needed, like chargers, which would have to be installed at wharves, on top of overcoming the sticker shock for fishers.
$6.5 million to support energy efficiency and innovation in fisheries and aquaculture here in Nova Scotia.
So Nova Scotia is now spending millions to propel electric fishing boats and other projects forward.
The perfect outcome would be to have 10 electric boats on the water next year. That would really allow people to see the technology can work, to build trust in the technology.
So lobster boats, I'm told, typically use up about 200 to 250
workboats.
Proponents believe electric fishing fleets are the future. The true test will come from those whose livelihoods would depend on it. Heidi Petrachek, Global News, Eastern Passage, Nova Scotia.
From the Red Sea to Calgary's Glenmore Reservoir, how a Ukrainian ship captain came to the rescue of this popular tourist park.
A ship captain from Ukraine has come to the rescue of a popular tourism spot in landlocked Calgary. The city's heritage park had to dock its popular paddle ship for part of the year last summer, after its previous captain retired and no replacement could be found. Park officials say they never expected to find their hero aboard a cargo ship in the Red Sea. Heather Yorks West explains.
It's a little boat, but Calgary residents know it well. Feel lucky to be here. Their new cargo, thankful as well. Thank you. Heather Yorks West, Global News, Calgary.
And that's Global National for this Thursday. I'm Farah Nasser. On behalf of our whole crew here, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's your Canada's Pitt Lake near Pitt Meadows, British Columbia. We love seeing your Canada, so please email us your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.
Good evening. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On the NewsHour tonight, in a win for reproductive rights advocates, the Supreme Court unanimously votes to protect access to the abortion pill mifepristone.
The latest on the war in Ukraine as G7 leaders meet in Italy and announce a deal to use frozen Russian assets to support the war-torn country.
And a look at the debate surrounding arming teachers as more states pass legislation allowing educators to carry guns on school grounds.
To your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. There was major news out of the Supreme Court today as a decision came down in a highly anticipated reproductive rights case where the justices protected access to widely used abortion pills.
In a unanimous decision, the court ruled that a group of anti-abortion doctors does not have any legal basis to challenge access to mifepristone. That's one of the two common drugs used in medication abortion. As a result, access to mifepristone will not change. Let's bring in our John Ye. John, it's great to have you here. So this ruling did not address the underlying issues that the plaintiffs raised, instead deciding the case only on standing. That this frustration. All right, John Ye, thanks so much for walking us through all of this. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
In the day's other news, Evan Gershkovich will stand trial in the Russian city of Yekaterinburg, where he was arrested more than a year ago. For the first time, Russian prosecutors specified the allegations against the Wall Street Journal reporter, accusing him of spying on a military factory for the CIA with, quote, painstaking conspiratorial methods. Gershkovich, his employer, and the U.S. government have denied any wrongdoing. It's not clear when the trial will begin. The Justice Department has found a pattern of civil rights abuse at the Phoenix Police Department. This includes discrimination against Black, Hispanic, and Native American people and the use of excessive force. In its 126-page report, the department found that officers use, quote, dangerous tactics that lead to force that is unnecessary and unreasonable. The findings come after a nearly 3-year investigation into complaints of brutality by city law enforcement. The head of the Federal Aviation Administration said today that his agency was, quote, too hands-off with Boeing leading up to a mid-flight incident in January. Administrator Michael Whitaker was referring to the door plug blowout aboard an Alaska Airlines flight. Testifying to a Senate committee today, Whitaker admitted that the FAA was too focused on paperwork audits and not on actual inspections.
We have changed that approach over the last several months, and those changes are permanent. We have now moved to a more active, comprehensive oversight model, the audit plus inspection approach, which allows the FAA to have much better insight into Boeing's operations.
Also on Capitol Hill today, lawmakers in the House grilled Microsoft President Brad Smith on his company's plan to improve its security. That comes after China-linked hackers stole 60,000 State Department emails by breaking into Microsoft systems last summer. Smith took responsibility for the attack and said the company is working on reducing its engineering presence in China. U.S. officials granted the Macaw tribe in Washington state a waiver to hunt gray whales today. The decision paves the way for what would be the tribe's first permitted hunt since 1999. The Macaw had hunted whales for hundreds of years, but quit in the early 20th century after commercial whaling shrank populations. The tribe has spent more than 2 decades trying to resume the practice. Even with the waiver, the Macaw will still need a permit, which could take months, and animal rights groups could challenge the decision in court. Tropical downpours pounded southern Florida for a 3rd day in a row today, adding to the already life-threatening floods in the area. Parts of Miami have seen more than 20 inches of rain since Tuesday. The nonstop precipitation has turned roads into rivers, submerging vehicles and stranding drivers. Aerial footage early today showed entire neighborhoods underwater. Longtime residents of Hollandale Beach, north of Miami, say they've never seen anything like it.
13 years, there's been storms, there's been rain, heavy rain, but never like this. This is extreme. This is a little bit too much. We was not expecting this.
The severe weather comes at the start of what's expected to be an extraordinary hurricane season. Weather officials say La Niña conditions are likely to form this summer, which typically lead to more hurricanes forming in the Atlantic. The head of the Senate Judiciary Committee said today that Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas took 3 undisclosed trips on a private jet provided by a Republican megadonor. The flights took place between 2017 and 2021. The committee notes that these trips were not included in an amendment filed last week to Thomas's 2019 financial disclosure. In a statement, Committee Chairman Dick Durbin said this new information, quote, makes it crystal clear that the highest court needs an enforceable code of conduct because its members continue to choose not to meet the moment. President Biden will nominate Christy Goldsmith Romero as the new head of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC. Goldsmith Romero is a longtime federal financial regulator who currently serves at the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. If confirmed by the Senate Banking Committee, she would replace Martin Gruenberg, who agreed to resign last month after reports of workplace harassment and abuse at the agency. New data out today shows signs of cooling in the U.S. economy. The Producer Price Index, which monitors prices before they reach consumers, dropped last month by its largest amount since October, and the number of Americans filing for unemployment benefits climbed to a 10-month high. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said on CNBC this morning that this latest data shows this economy is settling into a more natural rhythm.
The labor market has become a little less hot, a little bit more normal. And so the labor market now is resembling what it looked like pre-pandemic. Right. Wages are increasing, but at a slower rate. And so that doesn't really look like it's a threat to inflation.
The latest readings come a day after the Fed signaled it would only lower interest rates once this year. That's down from an earlier projection of 3 cuts. And on Wall Street today, stocks were largely unchanged. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 65 points to close at 38,647. The Nasdaq notched its 4th straight record close, adding 59 points. The S&P 500 also ended at a new high. Still to come on the NewsHour, former President Trump returns to Capitol Hill for the first time since the January 6th insurrection to meet with Republican lawmakers. Lifelong GOP supporters use a down-ballot race in Pennsylvania to voice disapproval of the extremism they see in their party. And Oscar-winning director and artist Steve McQueen discusses his new immersive exhibit.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at
They see in their party. And Oscar-winning director and artist Steve McQueen discusses his new immersive exhibit.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
President Biden signed a defense pact today with Ukraine on the sidelines of the G7 meeting in Italy. The group of 7 major industrialized powers also agreed on a plan to take Russian assets held in Europe and use that money to aid Ukraine in its fight against Russia's invasion. Here's Nick Schiffer.
Another day, another direct Russian hit on Ukraine.
Remember, there's more online, including our communities correspondent Adam Kemp's look at how Oklahoma researchers are trying to send severe weather alerts in more languages.
And join us again here tomorrow night when David Brooks and EJ Dion weigh in on the week's political headlines. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff.
Tonight, the major ruling by the Supreme Court upholding access to the most commonly used abortion pill in the nation. The justices unanimously rejecting a bid by anti-abortion advocates to impose strict new limits. The decision a victory for abortion rights supporters 2 years after the court overturned Roe v. Wade. And why the fight over the abortion pill and reproductive rights is far from over. Also tonight, the state of emergency in Florida. Millions bracing for more catastrophic flash floods as the storms turn deadly. Some areas getting a foot in a single day. President Biden on the world stage. Our correspondent asking would he commute his son Hunter's sentence. How he answered. Donald Trump back on Capitol Hill for the first time since the January 6th attack. His private meetings with Republicans and what happened when he saw Mitch McConnell for the first time since the senator blamed him for the Capitol riot. The new safety concerns for Boeing, the potential problem on brand new 787 Dreamliners. NBC News investigates the state with the highest rate of children in foster care facing allegations of horrifying abuse and a major lawsuit. And the animal advocate who turned this testing facility into a refuge for hundreds of four-legged friends.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening and welcome.
Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The official death toll in Gaza has topped 37,200 people, nearly 16,000 of them children, with more than 85,000 injured. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, head of the World Health Organization, warned famine spreading in Gaza.
A significant proportion of Gaza's population is now facing catastrophic hunger and famine-like conditions. Despite reports of increased delivery of food, there is currently no evidence that those who need it most are receiving sufficient quantity and quality of food.
This comes as deadly Israeli attacks continue across the Gaza Strip. Fresh attacks on the Nusayrat refugee camp have killed at least 5 people, while Israeli soldiers are using explosives to level buildings in the center of Rafah. Meanwhile, Israel's far-right finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, said this week he will confiscate some $35 million in Palestinian tax revenue and transfer the money to Israeli families who've lost relatives in Palestinian attacks. On the diplomatic front, world leaders from the G7 nations are meeting in Italy, where the U.S. says it'll push its allies to back its proposed Gaza ceasefire deal. Hamas has responded to the proposal, but on Wednesday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said some of the group's requested changes are not workable. Hamas responded in a statement, quote, "While Blinken continues to talk about Israel's approval of the proposal, we've not heard any Israeli official voicing approval," Hamas said. The Republican-controlled House of Representatives Wednesday voted to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress for refusing to turn over audio of President Biden's interview with Special Counsel Robert Hur. The Justice Department has already released the full transcript of the interview. Hur was tasked with investigating Biden's handling of classified material. He did not bring any charges against Biden, but Republicans claim they need the audio as part of their impeachment effort against the president. New York Democrat Jerry Nadler blasted his Republican colleagues as he spoke from the House floor.
The Judiciary Committee under Republican control has spent the last 18 months and $20 million taxpayer dollars in a desperate search to find something, anything, that they can use to damage President Biden and to protect Donald Trump.
The Justice Department, which Garland oversees, is not expected to prosecute Garland. In other news from Capitol Hill, Senate Republicans Wednesday blocked a Democratic bid to pass ethics and transparency legislation for the Supreme Court amidst mounting corruption scandals around the court's far-right justices. Meanwhile, in the House, Congress members Jamie Raskin and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have announced a new ethics bill for the Supreme Court, which AOC said has been, quote, captured and corrupted by money and extremism.
The constitutional and democratic crisis and threat that this current corruption crisis on the court presents is a threat not just to American way of life and American democracy, but it is a threat to our lives. People have died and are dying after the Dobbs decision. People have died and can die with the rollbacks of environmental provisions.
This comes as newly published audio recordings show Justice Samuel Alito lashing out at ProPublica, which exposed Clarence Thomas for accepting lavish gifts from conservative billionaire Harlan Crow over decades. We'll have more on this story after headlines with ProPublica reporter Justin Elliott and documentarian
Fuel. This condemns most Ecuadorian households to poverty and misery.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers across the country.
Tonight, several developing stories as we come on the air. The state of emergency right now in Florida. Sheets of rain still coming. The flooding emergencies playing out. The potentially record heat now moving into the east. And the wildfires tonight. Also, the Supreme Court's unanimous decision on the abortion pill. And tonight, the retired LA sheriff's deputy missing in Greece amid soaring temperatures. The all-out search and news coming in. A second American is now missing too. First tonight, new storms now pummeling Florida. Authorities warning of life-threatening and potentially catastrophic flooding. Dangerous driving, high water rescues. Residents who say they have never seen this before. And now the extreme heat moving into the east right up the coast.
Washington, Philadelphia, New York City. Meantime, that heat helping to fuel a massive wildfire, destroying homes, shutting down a highway. From the air, the images coming in at this hour from Arizona. Tonight's new reaction here after the Supreme Court's unanimous decision today, leaving access to the abortion pill mifepristone unchanged in this country. In many states, women still able to get it through the mail, but what the justices signaled today, leaving the door open to future challenges involving the abortion pill. Tonight, Donald Trump on Capitol Hill, his first visit back since the attack on the Capitol. Republican members of Congress right there with him, including Mitch McConnell, who once said Trump was responsible for January 6th. And tonight, what Donald Trump reportedly said in the meeting about the city that will host the Republican National Convention, saying Milwaukee is a horrible city. Tonight, President Biden with world leaders and the $50 billion loan plan for Ukraine. The president also making news when our reporter asked, will you commute your son Hunter Biden's sentence? Tonight in Russia, the major setback from Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. Russia formally charging him now with espionage. He will stand trial. Tonight, the U.S. saying despite any evidence against him. And tonight in Greece, that urgent search for a retired LA sheriff's deputy who had gone for a hike amid temperatures reaching triple digits. And now that word coming in of a second American missing, what we know so far. And later tonight, right here, America Strong, the scene at the airport terminal, right before passengers even boarded, the daughter, the pilot, and her remarkable tribute to her father.
From ABC. A swing and a miss. Those are the words a batter never wants to hear. But at last night's congressional baseball game, it's all Democrats heard.
A rock and a line from Stubbe. And a swing and a miss. And a swing and a miss. Dan Goldman from New York. And a swing and a miss that will end the inning.
Republicans roughed up Democrats 31-11. And yep, that's a baseball score. Maybe a little preview of what's coming in November. If you think about it, baseball's kind of like politics. If you keep striking out, you put the other team back at bat. All season, Democrats have been striking out with hoax after hoax. The dictator on day one, bloodbath and revenge. Democrats just put the other team back at bat in their own home stadium, Washington, D.C. Donald Trump back on Capitol Hill for the first time in almost 4 years. The former president spent the day meeting with House Republicans, senators, and businessmen.
This was a great meeting. There's tremendous unity in the Republican Party. We want to see borders. We want to see strong military. We want to see money not wasted all over the world. We have great common sense. A lot of very smart people in this room and a lot of people that love our country. They love our country beyond just about all else. And the only thing that maybe supersedes it is their family and maybe their faith in certain instances, and that's very nice. But they want this country to be great again, and we're going to make it great again.
Donald Trump's running around D.C. trying to unite the party and the country because teamwork makes the dream work. And we've never seen the Republican Party this united under Trump. They even gave him a birthday cake.
Let me make a wish. And guess what the wish is? And it has something to do with this room.
There was so much love and unity in the room, it broke Adam Schiff's brain. Watch.
Guilty, 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 guilty.
Schiff's battle cry was heard by the media, and they went to work doing what they do best.
Apparently, the former president made reference to Hannibal Lecter and said, nice guy, quote, he even had a friend over for dinner. So we've seen Trump out on the campaign trail praising Hannibal Lecter. Apparently, he did it again this morning. Not sure we fully understand the context of that.
We weren't inside the room, but neither was CNN, and that's the point. So we did what journalists do. We went to our sources who were actually there. Did Trump really call a flesh-eating serial killer a nice guy? No. Trump was joking that if he said something about Hannibal Lecter, the fake news media would say he was praising him, and CNN took the bait. And that wasn't the only hoax. I'm getting word, yep, from my producers, we have a new hoax alert.
New hoax alert. New hoax alert. New hoax alert.
He said, as it's gotten a lot of publicity, and we broke this, that he doesn't like Milwaukee. It's a horrible city, he says. The campaign has pushed back on that. Everybody comes out and says he didn't say it. Of course he said it. I mean, that is according to almost everybody in the room.
But everybody in the room says he didn't say it. As soon as the news broke, people inside of the room debunked it. A congressman says, I was in the meeting. President Trump never disparaged Milwaukee. Another one, I was in the room. President Trump did not say this. Another, Trump was specifically referring to the crime rate in Milwaukee. Here's what Trump had to say.
Democrats are also hitting you on this comment that you made about Milwaukee, the host city for the RNC, for the convention, and they seem to believe that you said that it was a horrible city. Can you just nip this in the bud and clarify what you meant?
Well, I think it was very clear what I meant. I said we're very concerned with crime. I love Milwaukee. I have great friends in Milwaukee. But it's, as you know, the crime numbers are terrible, and we have to be very careful.
So how's the media directly quoting him if they're not in the room with him? And then telling the people inside of the room that they're wrong? It's what Nancy Pelosi calls the wrap-up smear. You smear your opponent with lies, the press writes about it, that validates it, and then the politicians run with it. And as soon as the media reported the hoax, the mayor of Milwaukee rushed to the camera.
Donald Trump was talking about things that he thinks are horrible. All of us lived through his presidency, so right back at you, buddy.
Joe Biden saying, quote, I happen to love Milwaukee. He obviously didn't write that himself. Kamala Harris saying, Milwaukee's a beautiful city. And for the record, Milwaukee was the third most violent city in the nation. Third most. So when primetime goes to the convention, Johnny's going to probably have 2 bodyguards. Democrats are down late in the game. Your pitcher's throwing trash. You can't yank them because you have no bullpen. Look at Kamala. So you just have to keep throwing trash. Here's more. The media wants you to think Trump spends every waking second plotting revenge.
I'm told there's a similar dynamic behind closed doors when he meets with advisors or other Republicans, where he'll talk about revenge, sometimes get a look like, well, do you really mean that? And he makes it clear he does. This is retribution. That's the word that has been the center of this Trump campaign for a year now. There are not going to be grown-ups in the room this time. They're not going to be guardrails. It is just going to be true believers and loyalists. And if Trump says he wants revenge, if Trump says I want to target a particular person or institution, they're going to do just that.
Who are these Trump advisors that are leaking this BS to MSNBC? They don't exist. It's made up. Trump's people don't talk to this guy. Look at him. He's on Morning Joe. He's probably a spook. Politico says Trump went to Washington to harness the power of Congress to go to war against the Democrats. Really? People inside of the room told us revenge never came up. It was the economy, foreign policy, and election strategy. It was forward-looking, a feeling that Washington hasn't felt in 4 years. That's not revenge, that's success. And like Trump says, success is his revenge. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.
To NATO meetings strategizing Europe's defense, here on France 24.
Dave Keating, one of the 200 France 24 correspondents around the world.
Hello, welcome to Daybreak here on France 24. I'm Yingo Itade. The headlines. G7 leaders greenlight a $50 billion loan for Ukraine, raising the funds using profits from frozen Russian assets. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden signing a 10-year security agreement with his Ukrainian counterpart, that with the aim of providing long-term support for the country in the war against Russia. Left-wing parties bind together in an alliance ahead of snap legislative elections in France. On the right, though, chaos continues to ensue as the Republicans' former leader refuses to give up power despite being expelled by his party. And it's kick-off in Germany for the Euros today. 24 teams set to go head-to-head for the title. Germany, England and France are set to be the favourites. We begin in the Italian city of Bari, where leaders from the world's 7 richest countries have been gathering. Thursday saw the inking of a 10-year security agreement between US President Joe Biden and his Ukrainian counterpart to help Kyiv in the war against Russia. The pact includes a commitment from Washington to work with Congress on the source of sustainable funding for the future, while that all came from his Ukrainian counterpart to help Kyiv in the war against Russia. The pact includes a commitment from Washington to work with Congress on the source of sustainable funding for the future, while that all came after Biden and the other G7 leaders agreed to a $50 billion loan using profits from frozen Russian assets for Ukraine. The US leader says the security pact will help Ukraine on the road to lasting peace.
This is an agreement on security and thus on the
between our militaries in line with NATO standards.
Well, as we've been mentioning, Thursday also saw G7 leaders greenlight a $50 billion loan for Ukraine. They say they'll use the funds from profits from frozen Russian assets. Kyiv is set to use that money to help rebuild its infrastructure, which has been devastated by the Russian invasion. Moscow is already lashing out, calling the move illegal. For more on the loan, here's our international affairs editor, Philip Searle, who is in Bari for us.
It was certainly Giorgia Meloni's day on Thursday when she welcomed in the leaders of the G7 countries radiantly to the resort of Bormio and Nizza in southeastern Italy. G7 summit to get as much done as they possibly can because the future looks so uncertain.
While as tensions flare over the war in Ukraine, a Russian naval flotilla and a nuclear-powered submarine have docked in Havana. The move, seen as a show of force, has ruffled feathers, but Russia says countries like the US has nothing to worry about. Relations between Moscow and Havana are the best they've been since the Cold War, but that could spell potential trouble for Washington. Our Havana correspondent, Ed Augustin, sent us this report.
A Russian naval deployment docked in Havana on Wednesday for the first time since the start of the war in Ukraine. Analysts say it's a signal of sanctions placed on Cuba ever since the Trump administration are binding the erstwhile allies together.
Israel has carried out fresh airstrikes on Rafah as fierce street battles continue between militants and the Israeli army. It comes against the backdrop of ongoing negotiations to secure a ceasefire deal. Washington growing increasingly frustrated with President Biden calling Hamas the biggest hang-up so far to a potential pact on a truce and hostage release. Well, this all comes as Muslims prepare to celebrate Eid al-Adha, but people in Gaza say they are in no festive mood. Take a listen.
We have children, Eid is coming, and we do not have balloons or toys.
And there are lights on the doors. But unfortunately, today we don't even have a house anymore, and there is nothing to decorate. There's no Eid spirit.
Next, here in France, political parties representing the French left wing say they've reached an agreement to form a new alliance. They're calling themselves the Popular Front and hope to rally support ahead of snap elections coming up later this month. In a joint statement, the party said the alliance marked a new page in the history of France that has been written. Monty Francis reports.
7 months ago, when their previous alliance, known as the NUPES, imploded, it looked like France's left-leaning parties would never be able to agree. But now the Socialists, the Greens, France Unbowed, and the French Communist parties, and the alliance holds, the Popular Front could become a contender to form a majority in the new French parliament.
Meanwhile, chaos continues to ensue on the right. A Paris court is set to examine a move to oust Eric Ciotti as the Republicans' party leader. Ciotti was expelled from his party earlier this week after sparking uproar over an attempt to form an alliance with the far-right National Rally. While Ciotti continues to hold on to power, he's dismissing the efforts to remove him as party leader as, quote, quibbles and little battles by mediocre people who understand nothing about what's going on in the country. France 24's reporter Claire Paquelin was at the Republican Party's headquarters in Paris. She sent us this update.
The right-wing Republicans Party is tearing itself in two. On the one hand, we have Eric Ciotti, the leader of the party, who's now aligned himself with the far-right party of Marine Le Pen. That has provoked the other senior members of the Republicans Party to say they have grounds to expel him from the party, that he's a traitor, that he's gone against all the rules of the party by going off on his own and aligning himself with the far right. Eric Ciotti, though, saying that he will seek legal action if they try to expel him from the party. What we do know, as all this infighting goes on here in French politics, what we do know is that all the parties only have until Sunday to declare their candidates. After that, the official campaign will begin. 2 weeks of campaigning before June 3rd and the first round of this parliamentary election, the snap election here in France.
Let's go to the US now, because the Supreme Court on Thursday ruled unanimously against a bid to restrict access to a drug used in more than half of the country's abortions. The 9 justices decided that the procedure's opponents lacked the legal right to sue over the Federal Food and Drug Administration's approval of the medication, mifepristone. It's the latest attempts to curb pregnancy terminations in the country, 2 years on from the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, which had enshrined the constitutional right to an abortion. Our Washington correspondent Fraser Jackson reports.
So this centered around the drug mifepristone, and it saw the Federal Drug Administration against the Alliance for Hippocratic as well. So a real landmark ruling here by the Supreme Court for reproductive rights.
In Canada, forest fires have never seemed to be so destructive. 15 million hectares, the equivalent of more than a quarter of mainland France, have been swept by flames. From the Western Plains through the boreal forest belts to the Arctic Circle, global warming is now 2 to 3 times faster than in the rest of the world. 2023, the hottest year on record globally, has inevitably hit harder there. Firefighters, rescue workers, and residents are learning to live with the ever-increasing risk of natural disasters. Here's François Riouet and Joanne Profeta with this special report.
Penticton in southern British Columbia. Firefighters.
Well, you can see that special report in full during our reporters program tomorrow at 10:15 p.m. Paris time. Now, football pitches across Germany are getting ready to host fierce battles as the Euros kick off today, while the host nation will face off with Scotland later this Friday. Germany, England, and France are shaping up to be the favourites for the tournament. Caitlin Kelly takes a look.
Although they've never won the tournament, England are the bookies' favourite for the year, and bets are on as to whether England can finally bring it home.
Let's take another look at the headlines at this hour. G7 leaders greenlight a $50 billion loan for Ukraine, raising the funds using profits from frozen Russian assets. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden signing a 10-year...
Four Corners, Monday, ABC and ABC iView.
Today, a 16-year-old boy accused of stabbing a bishop in Sydney's southwest in April, charged with 2 additional offences. Also ahead, renewed support for Ukraine. Joe Biden pledges US backing for 10 years, while the G7 approves a $75 billion loan. Preparations underway in Canberra ahead of high-level talks with the Chinese Premier and Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. And a prolonged cold snap across Australia's southeast expected to linger for at least another week. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ruby Cornish. A teenage boy accused of stabbing a bishop at a church in southwest Sydney in April is now facing 2 additional charges. Today, a children's court in Parramatta has heard authorities are analysing tens of thousands of images and videos from his phone. Court reporter Jamie McKinnell has more from Parramatta.
This 16-year-old boy was first charged in April with committing a terrorist act. Today at Parramatta Children's Court, the magistrate was told he's now facing 2 additional offences. According to court documents, those charges are wounding Bishop Mari Emanuel with intent to murder and wounding a second man that same night in April at Wakeley's Christ the Good Shepherd Church. The teenager is accused of stabbing the bishop at that church during a service which was being live streamed. Today in court, a representative from the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions said there's an extensive amount of material being analysed from the teenager's phone. The court heard that this material includes 52,000 images and 7,500 videos. Prosecutors are now hopeful that within 6 weeks, the balance of the brief of evidence will have been served. The teenager didn't apply for bail today and it was formally refused. Now, separate to this 16-year-old's case, a New South Wales police strike force police station and another at a correctional facility in Cessnock.
Jamie McKinnell there reporting from Parramatta. The jury in the Greg Lynn murder trial has been sent out to consider their verdict. The former Jetstar pilot has pleaded not guilty to killing retired campers Russell Hill and Carol Clay in March 2020. Cyan Balance reports.
4 years since Russell Hill and Carol Clay disappeared.
$1 million reward is being offered for information that could help solve the cold case of Maria James. The single mother was murdered in a frenzied stabbing 44 years ago in the back of her Melbourne bookshop. Police say even the tiniest of details could prove the missing puzzle piece. Rachel Brown reports.
Their mother's last words were, "Look after your brother," and that's what they've done for the past 44 years. Mark and Adam James.
Mark will never stop fighting this.
Rachel Brown, ABC News, Melbourne.
For more on this cold case, head to the ABC's podcast Trace on the ABC Listen app or online at abc.net.au/trace. The federal opposition says it's confident a social media ban for young people could be easily implemented. The Albanese government supports the idea of a ban for people under 16, but is concerned the technology to achieve it isn't quite ready yet. Political reporter Tom Lowry has more.
The coalition is saying that this is technologically feasible, but also that it doesn't have to spell out the exact technology that's going to be used. All afternoon pouring through this new detail.
Yes, enough to keep us on our toes. Tom Lowry at Parliament House, thank you very much for breaking it down for us. And the independent member for North Sydney, Kylie Tink, spoke a short time ago about the Electoral Commission's proposal to abolish the seat. She says the 2022 election was a watershed moment that saw voters abandon the major parties, and that even without North Sydney, that movement won't stop.
Truth of the matter is that sadly, while we've had an incredible run in this 47th Parliament, the issues that saw my community send me to North Sydney, those issues being faster action on climate, integrity and transparency in politics, and a fair go for everyone who finds themselves in Australia, are just as pressing today as they were in 2022 when we saw that election. So the work of the community independent movement is anything but done. And I know I speak for the residents of North Sydney, regardless of what seat they may end up in, and representation for themselves at the federal parliamentary level.
The G7 forum has agreed to use frozen Russian assets to raise $75 billion for Ukraine in its fight against Russia. Moscow is threatening to retaliate, describing the measures as illegal.
World leaders turn their eyes to the sky, watching the Italian army in action. A performance symbolic of a G7 summit with war at the top of the agenda. A decade-long commitment to a country battling on the front line. Rani Hayman, ABC News.
Russian prosecutors have announced American journalist Evan Gershkovich will be on trial on espionage charges. The now 32-year-old man has spent more than a year behind bars in Moscow, accused of working for the CIA. The Russians say the Wall Street Journal reporter was collecting secrets from a Russian tank factory to pass on to the US spy agency. If found guilty, he could face 20 years in jail. The US says the charges have zero credibility.
We have been clear from the start that Evan has done nothing wrong. He should never have been arrested in the first place. Journalism is not. Charges against him are false, and the Russian government knows that they're false. He should be released immediately.
Preparations are underway in Canberra for the arrival of the Chinese Premier, who will meet with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese on Monday. Security is being tightened, with fences being placed around parts of Parliament House and around the hotel where Premier Lee is expected to stay. China's second most senior leader is currently in New Zealand for a second day of meetings. Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedges has the details.
You're already seeing fences going up all over the place. This is a really fairly extraordinary level of security that's already in place.
Interesting to see how the talks here go. Stephen Jedges at Canberra's Parliament House. Thank you. Time for finance now with Sam Yang. Sam, more job cuts in the consultancy world.
Yeah, that's right. And this time is at KPMG Australia. Up to 250 jobs could go as part of the $80 million cost.
You work. Thank you, Sam Yang. An international study of home affordability has placed most Australian capital cities among the world's least affordable, with Sydney ranking the second worst globally. Reporter Bethany Alderson has the details from Adelaide.
For the first time in the 20-year history of Chapman University, land for development as one solution for more affordable housing.
Much of the southeast is shivering through an extended spell of below-average temperatures. Yesterday, Melbourne recorded its coldest day in 5 years. ABC meteorologist Tom Saunders is here to explain. Tom, explain what's going on.
Well, Ruby, most cold...
South Africa's new parliament will hold its inaugural session in Cape Town on Friday. The session will see new legislators take their oaths, the election of a speaker, deputy speaker, and president of the country. The country's chief justice will preside over the swearing-in of legislators and the election of the president. Jacob Zuma's MK party announced that its deputies would stay away from the ceremony. Incumbent President Cyril Ramaphosa is widely expected to retain his seat, despite his African National Congress party losing its majority in the May 29th vote. For the last 2 weeks, ANC has been negotiating with various parties in an effort to put together a governing coalition. On Wednesday, the Inkatha Freedom Party announced that it had agreed to take part in a unity government led by the ANC. Ramaphosa's party only managed 40% of the vote and 159 seats. The UN Chief of Humanitarian Affairs wants G7 leaders meeting in Italy to use their influence to prevent a man-made famine. Martin Griffiths warned in a statement that conflict was fueling hunger in many parts of the world. He singled out Gaza and Sudan, where warring parties have been accused of blocking the delivery of life-saving aid.
Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, is appealing to G7 leaders to use their influence to prevent man-made famine. In a statement issued earlier today, he warned that conflict is fueling hunger in too many corners of the world, from Mali to Myanmar. But he said nowhere is the choice between inaction and oblivion so clear as in Gaza and Sudan.
In Gaza, UNICEF is warning that nearly 3,000 children in the south of the Strip have been cut off from treatment for moderate and severe acute malnutrition, putting them at risk of death. Discussions at the G7 summit are expected to be dominated by Ukraine. Wednesday's sanctions package targeted individuals and companies in China, the United Arab Emirates, and Turkey accused of helping Russia's war efforts in Ukraine. They were announced as President Joe Biden and other G7 leaders touched down in Italy for a summit aimed at boosting support for Kiev. Despite sweeping sanctions since 2022, Moscow has managed to keep its economy running and registered modest growth.
Today we've announced sweeping new measures to intensify the pressure on Russia. These actions will ratchet up the risk that foreign financial institutions take by dealing with Russia's war economy. The Department of Treasury is making clear that foreign banks risk being sanctioned for dealing with any entity or individual blocked under our Russia sanctions, including designated Russian banks. The foreign targets include more than 24 PRC entities and individuals, and additional targets across multiple other third countries in multiple regions in East Asia, the Middle East, Europe, Africa, Central Asia, and the Caribbean.
At the summit, the leaders will also discuss turning frozen Russian assets into billions of dollars to arm Ukraine. Moscow has warned that any such move will be met with retaliation.
The head of UN Refugee Agency, Filippo Grandi, said that the cumulative number of people who have been subjected to forced displacement rose to 120 million people in 2023, 6 million more than in the year before.
Strong sort of anti-migrant stance.
We're now at 120 million. Last year, we announced 114 million, so 6 million more in a year. Some people have gone back, but relatively few, mostly internally displaced people. But otherwise, between Sudan, Gaza, and many other places, this figure has continued to rise.
Grandi further lamented how crisis in Africa had been largely overlooked, in particular in Sudan, where some 10.8 million people were displaced at the end of last year after conflict erupted between forces led by rival generals in April last year.
We should never forget that the 9 million Sudanese who are displaced or refugees, those are the ones my organization deals with, among many others that haven't even left but are impacted in their homes, millions of them, that these people suffer exactly like the civilians in Ukraine or the civilians in Gaza and in many other places.
Grandi also criticized the Biden administration plans to enact new restriction on migrants seeking asylum at the border, saying this is a possible violation of international humanitarian law.
Make way, Paul, the psychic octopus. There's a new Nostradamus in the world of football results forecasting, and she's a very big deal. Meet Booby, the Oracle African elephant who lives in a reserve in central Germany. On Wednesday, she hoofed a ball upfield into a goal marked with the German flag, confidently predicting victory for Germany against Scotland in the opening game of Euro 2024. Our African elephant Booby is an oracle on who will be the winner of the next football match, Germany versus Scotland. And what did Booby score? Germany, of course. Although originally from Italy, Booby could be seen afterwards celebrating her prediction by waving the black-red-gold tricolour of her adopted home. Keepers discovered Booby's enthusiasm for football by chance when a ball rolled into her enclosure and she kicked it back.
died, but says both deaths were accidental. He says that he panicked and he did burn the campsite, hide their bodies and then go back to burn them, but that he was doing so to protect his family and his career. It will be up to a jury to decide what is.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.